Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Invest Africa. I'm Alicia Second. Well, Johannesburg is regarded as the commercial and economic capital of the African continent. The MMC for Finance of the City of Johannesburg recently tabled an ambitious budget worth 43.8 million rand, and that to tackle existing and future city requirements. But the city's soaring wage bill continues to be a concern. Philani Nyalunga filed this report.
We appropriated in council 44 billion rands. 7.5 billion rands thereof is for capital expenditure, and the remainder is for operating expenses. What's important about the capital expenditure is that it grew by 60% compared to the current year, which is the 2012-2013 year. We believe that it's a budget that is going to take Johannesburg to a higher level.
The City of Johannesburg is regarded as a world-class city. It's also one of the largest contributors to the South African economy. According to the city's Growth and Development Strategy 2040, the city currently generates 16% of South Africa's GDP and accounts for 40% of the province's economic activity. However, the city's increasing remuneration bill remains a challenge. According to experts, its wage bill needs to be cut down as it could have a significant impact on the city's ability to generate revenue. Another challenge the city continues to face is the billing crisis, where, according to media reports, thousands of residents have either not received their monthly billing accounts or getting substantially inflated ones. This has caused countless cut-offs and also a drop in the collection of revenue.
Correct billing. Billing has to be correct. One of them is that we have to have a clean audit, because we have to create early confidence in the minds of the investors that we really run our finances well. The other is to reduce the amount of salaries as a percentage of operating expenses. We are now sitting at around 34%. We want to reduce it to around 30%. Why is it important to do that? It's because you can't be earning money and spending it on yourselves. You have to pay yourselves less and spend the rest of the money on the citizens of Johannesburg.
Just like any other city, transportation has had a profound impact on the City of Johannesburg. However, with the city's 2013-2014 budget, changes are to be made on the city's key priority areas, and that includes the transport system.
A major big program is the development of the corridors of freedom, which is really a very exciting development that's going to take place starting this financial year and really going into the future up to 2030. What we're going to be doing is taking the bus rapid transport routes as a backbone. Think of those bus rapid transit routes linking, for instance, Soweto to the inner city to Alex, linking Alex to Sandton, and basically getting rid of the whole apartheid model that the city currently has.
Johannesburg is one of the world's class cities and Africa's commercial hub. But there are changes that need to be made to make Joburg a city that's livable, sustainable and resilient. The city needs to be able to address its issues if it hopes to live up to its residents' expectations and its economic potential. Philani Nyalunga, CNBC Africa, Johannesburg.
Well, joining me in studio today to take a closer look at the City of Johannesburg as Africa's leading investment and commercial hub is Keith Brebnor. He's director at the Johannesburg Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We've got Martin Davies as well, CEO of Frontier Advisory, with us at the desk today. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining me. Well, in a recent debate that I hosted on megacities, I came across an interesting quote by A.T. Kearney in the 2012 Global Cities Index, and it said, "The world today is more about cities than it is about countries." Martin, to what extent does that ring true in an African context where certainly it's only now that I think foreign investors are starting to differentiate between the countries themselves?
Well, you always have these arguments in Africa about whether the borders are artificial or real. Well, clearly, if we accept they may be artificial in many cases, then cities rise in importance. I think going forward for Johannesburg specifically, there's a competition almost. Every hub, every region needs a hub The hub for East Africa is Nairobi, with competition from Addis Ababa perhaps. Undoubtedly Johannesburg's the hub for Southern Africa. West Africa's, I don't think, maybe Accra, maybe Lagos. There's infrastructure constraints on both, obviously. Francophone Africa, Paris is the hub. Dubai, arguably, is the new Africa hub, with 60 flights a week coming into SA, I believe. So if we claim to be this gateway, at the very least a transactional platform, considering the competitiveness of our capital markets, our financial services sector, we certainly have rising competition as the City of Johannesburg. So we need to step up to this. And rather than countries competing, in this context, cities undoubtedly competing.
Looking at the status as it stands right now, Keith, I mean, we've got a hub that generates 16% of South Africa's wealth. It employs 12% of the national workforce, and some 74% of South African companies have their headquarters based here. Yet by the strict definition of what constitutes a megacity, Johannesburg isn't one of Africa's mega cities. Do we have to look more so at tone as opposed to, strict and specific figures regarding these labels?
Well, remembering the history, Johannesburg was founded on gold. It had around it on the Witwatersrand other cities spring up. Brakpan, Benoni, Springs, going right up to Carltonville and Randfontein. So in reality, Johannesburg is much bigger than just the boundaries of Johannesburg. There's no way that it ends just at Bedford View. And the factories of the East Rand were totally linked to the gold mines in Johannesburg. Mm-hmm. So if we really got to talk about population and data and numbers, I think Johannesburg really should be a city region type area, which is probably 3/4 of Gauteng. Now, in the plans for the city region, they were talking about even including countries or places like Sasolburg in the city region to make it much more competitive with Ile-de-France and the other great metropolises of the world.
Yeah, it's going to be very hard to take a look then at how exactly Johannesburg is contributing to the national coffers, to that GDP specifically. So let's look at Gauteng as a province itself. I mean, how that's contributing to national GDP, the contribution we're looking at, from a city like Johannesburg.
Well, being where it is one of its major features. Most cities founded on gold disappeared once the gold ran out. This didn't happen with Johannesburg because of our position. As you know, we're the biggest city not on a national or natural transportation route. And normally Johannesburg, being 6,000 feet up as well, would have actually faded away when the gold mines faded. But because it's positioned so high up into South Africa's region, and it's the springboard into Africa. Mm-hmm. So from Johannesburg Chamber of Commerce's point of view, we got founded 4 years after the city was founded. We realized very clearly then that we'd be the springboard because of the mines and because of the export and the trade that we're going to do with the rest of the world in Africa. And then, of course, with the big airport and all of that, we grew and grew into that. Normally, we're lucky to be where we are at this moment.
Yeah. Given that status then, how do we adequately leverage off this position, Martin? I mean, urban planning has got to be key here. How are you rating stride being made in that regard, especially where setting up of infrastructure, public works, transportation should form one of those key pillars because it's needed to be supportive of sustained and a higher growth moving forward.
You mentioned sustained, and picking up what Keith said, Johannesburg arguably is the greatest example of sustainable development ever. Started life just over a century ago as a small, dusty gold mining town. Mm-hmm. Today is the engine room, be it Johannesburg or Gauteng, is the engine room undoubtedly of the continent. The antithesis of Johannesburg would be Kimberley, where it was the center of the global diamond trade over a century ago, and what is left today? A hole and nothing much else. So Johannesburg is the prime example of the true sustainable development, I would argue, and diversification. Mm-hmm. To your point, I think what does Johannesburg need to do more of going forward, particularly in the light of robust growth in Africa? This presents a phenomenal opportunity. We're almost servicing the region as we are to an extent, as Hong Kong would service South China, as Singapore would service Southeast Asia. Johannesburg needs to step up to the plate a little bit more to compete and act in the same sort of
conduit. As you say, with that rising competition, we cannot be complacent.
We cannot. But what we need to do is, of course, connectivity and infrastructure is obvious. We all know that. But beyond that, what I would like to see, and this is maybe a clash of policy interests between central government and city management, is we need to see the city become a default natural home for Fortune 500 companies and leading multinationals globally, to set up their Africa headquarters here in Johannesburg, taking advantage of the infrastructure, be it airline, be it broadband connectivity, whatever it may be. But how do we get those companies here? We should not expect them because there's not much competition in our region. Clearly Mozambique, Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe are not competing with us. Our competition traditionally has been a minimum 9 hours flight away, perhaps to India, to Europe, and perhaps to Latin America. The competition is coming closer, those cities I mentioned. And ironically, much of our competition for the Africa default hub is coming from outside the continent. As mentioned, Dubai, Paris, even London perhaps. So we need to compete and offer the policy incentives, be it tax, whatever it may be, to get these multinationals headquartered here in Johannesburg.
Is enough incentive from a policy perspective being put on the table?
Well, up until 5 years ago there was, and all the head offices were moving into Johannesburg. But over the last 4 years, with, as Martin says, the increase of our neighbouring territories and the fact that it's not that easy and we're not being as natural a springboard as we should be, people are starting to look and starting to say, instead of using Joburg as a springboard, let's actually set up in Angola or Mozambique or Zimbabwe even. And that's very worrying. So we've got to reclaim that space. And we've got to become more competitive.
In that reclamation, let's take a look at some of the initiatives that have come to the fore. I mean, you know, you've got to look at cost of doing business in any territory. That is front of mind for any investor. And we've got investment being made in technology, for example, to the amount of 44 million rand. It's allocated towards a fiber optic infrastructure for broadband network. We've had the ratio for business tariffs having been reduced from 3.5% to 3% as well. What do you think of incentives like these that are being put on the table?
Well, I think those are musts. I mean, we just have to do it, except they've been talking about this broadband project for 5 years now. We actually have to move on these things. We cannot sit back. Our competitiveness is dropping. Our gateway status is being lost. And in fact, it's because of not taking ownership as city itself and listening to province and national, rather than saying, look, this is our city, we have to run it, we've got to lead the way over the other cities in South Africa. When we had the Imbiza with President Mbeki in 2007, we laid on the table from the Chambers of Commerce and all the chambers around Joburg exactly what was needed in the terms of skills, transport, broadband, etc. Now that was 6 years ago, and not a lot's been done. Okay, the BRT was started, but that was forced on them because of the World Cup. So we're saying you've got to look at trade. We're a trading centre. JCCR sees it. Most of our members are moving into exporting into Africa, and we actually have to have our city play the part of a leader.
Martin, when I asked the question, I could sense that you're not one of those that are convinced by the kind of plans that are being tabled and just how effectively it's going to be implemented at the end of the day.
Like, I think, you know, everyone who comes to Johannesburg is immediately impressed by the hard infrastructure we have. The airport is fantastic, and you know, it's even beyond a first world European status in many instances. You go to Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, you feel you're in a third world country effectively. That's nothing like OR Tambo. We have fantastic infrastructure. What I'm referring to, I would like to see, and this is not so much a city debate as it is a central government one, is tax incentives. You know, for example, Singapore would have a flat corporate tax rate of 15%. If you go in, it's not about employment creation, it's about intellectual property contribution. That tax rate is highly negotiable, depending on who you are and what contribution you're making to the city-state.
Are there not dangers that are inherently linked to putting incentives like those forward?
I think it's too short-termist. This is not just a Johannesburg story. This could be an IDZ story, soon to be SEZ story as well in our country. Is the greater tax incentives incentivize business to locate to the specific region. We're on the southern tip of Africa. We are not on the Chinese coast. We're not in Southeast Asia. We're not in sort of around Dubai, UAE area. We need to put in place those softer policy incentives around tax incentives. Companies, and don't look at narrowly saying, well, what are we going to get from this company in terms of tax? Companies, multinationals locate, they bring in their supply chain with them, they create jobs, the spin-offs for downstream benefits, even upstream benefits, and many multinational companies' investments are incredible for an economy. And it's mostly around beyond just looking at simple jobs created directly or tax revenue paid directly. It's more about the broader benefits these investments and these companies, and not so much for capital or for employment, but the IP that comes with it.
Well, let's leave the conversation there for now. At least we're headed into a short commercial break, but there's more on investment and commercial potential of the city of Johannesburg when we return, so don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching Invest Africa, and still with me in studio to unpack this week's topic is Keith Brebnor. He's director at the Johannesburg Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and also with us, Martin Davies, CEO of Frontier Advisory. Gentlemen, let's get back into this conversation because you alluded to it a little earlier, Martin, looking at sustainable growth in a province like Gauteng, in a city like Johannesburg, and a lot of that being attributed to the fact that we're looking at a very diverse range of sectors where we have exposure to. We've got financial and business services, retail and wholesale trade, community and social services, manufacturing. There's a bit of mining in that mix as well. And the city of Johannesburg has highlighted that it's looking at broadening that to more modern sectors as well. Information technology, telecommunications, film and media. The list is extensive. Just how much confidence does it ignite?
Well, again, Johannesburg up until now has been that default catch-all sort of economic engine room, and we remain to be that. But for me, it's, if you're looking at successful cities or successful economies in the last 2-3 decades, particularly from developing emerging market economies, the successful ones have been those that have been able to successfully and well implemented clusters. This goes back to Michael Porter from Harvard Business School theory around clustering for competitiveness. So, for example, what clusters do we have firstly in the country first, and what do we have in Johannesburg? Clusters, we have automotive clusters, we have agribusiness clusters, we have an asset management cluster in Cape Town, advertising cluster. What are the clusters in Johannesburg? Well, we have I think from a sort of logistics cluster, undoubtedly, on the East Rand around OR Tambo Airport, perhaps Kasuni as well, the sort of so-called dry port. We have a financial services, world-class, world-leading financial services, banking, capital markets cluster. We have a lot of the, as mentioned earlier, maybe it's not so much a cluster, but we have a congregation, if you will, a collection of leading multinational companies here. We also have a cluster we have world-class leading business schools. Wits Business School's up the road, Henny Business School is here. So more importantly, rather than having an extensive list of let's try and do everything, maybe we should try and rather join the existing dots we have and make the functionality of what we have better to support our key priorities around these clusters.
Your comment, Keith, on clustering for competitiveness, that's a very catchy phrase there.
It is a very catchy phrase. I think one thing that's missing from your list of major contributors to GDP is trade. We are the head of trade in this region, and trade, I would say, must be second to financial services. And from that trade side, if we can get the logistics going, and just on the dry port, that's in danger right as we talk, because Customs is trying to put an act through Parliament that it actually deems City Deep, our inland port, just a container terminal, takes away its status, and that will be terribly damaging to OR Tambo Springs. They're trying to develop Pretcom and City Deep, and in fact we're not sure what the reasoning is. We're trying to halt it at Parliament through the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee, but it's a very important feature. These inland ports are a worldwide phenomenon. They work extremely well. Around Paris, I think there's 15 of them, and now they're trying to take away our status as one. So that would be very hurtful, and we hope that sense will prevail. But beyond that, we really should stay as the centre of trade of the region, SADC as well as the Sub-Saharan Africa. Most of our members are now starting to move into Africa, move their offices into Africa, which is quite interesting. And they're taking the Chinese and the Indian countries head on in some of the fields, medical, etc.
Where trade is such a big focus, Martin, I mean, we've got, a 103.7 million rand operating budget being allocated towards stimulating economic growth through labor-intensive industry. Specifically, there's quite a focus on SMME development as well. What kind of work and progress are we actually seeing on that front?
The biggest challenge doesn't just apply to Johannesburg, obviously, it's every city in this part of the world and many others, will be tackling unemployment, particularly youth unemployment. Urbanization took place in Europe in the 19th century, 19th century, on the back of industrialization. What is urbanization? What is driving urbanization in Africa? It's not industrialization. It's perhaps failure and lack of opportunity in a rural economy. So the greatest challenge that our city will face is saying, how do we provide opportunity? Be it educational, be it employment opportunity for young people going forward. Linking this to industrialization, services will never, perhaps with few exceptions, mop up the large amount of unemployment we have as a city, as a province, as a country, unfortunately. This can only be tackled really through true either industrialization, factory type jobs, blue collar type jobs, and there's nothing wrong with that at all, with the necessary technical skills supplying that, and secondly through entrepreneurial micro SMME enterprise. I believe that the two obviously must be run in parallel, education opportunities, but secondly is creating a more entrepreneurial culture. This is cannot be directed by a state, it cannot be directed or enforced by a government. It only comes through liberalization. The role of a government in such trying times, be it city government or central government, as we live in today, with unemployment approaching 40%, is not regulation, it's liberalization. You know, and I often say, and half jokingly, capitalism is what people do when government leaves them alone.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And we've often had the conversation of let business do what they're good at and let government create a conducive enough business and operating environment for them to do their jobs. Let's take a look at this issue of skills, because there's mention made of a commitment to addressing the issue of a skills mismatch between supply and demand through a skills hub. How much of a deterrent to investment has access to lack of or lack of skills been?
Well, on the skills situation, as I said, with that Imbizo we had with the former president, we talked about it as the second biggest challenge we had. Nothing much has been done to address it. The development of SMMEs and SMEs to become the growth employers of the which that's the way it has to be, hasn't taken off as it should. Pravin Gordhan, the Minister of Finance, said the other day he needs a plethora of incubators. The last few years we've been working with the city on an export development promotion program, as well as with the Gauteng province on a Plato mentorship program. Both of those have come to a bit of a halt, and they want us for private sector to do it. So we're working with private sector right now. That's my new role now, and setting up incubators in the city whereby they obviously our strength is exports and trade, and we will continue what we did with the city program and try and train up SMEs to become good exporters like we did for the last 5 years, and somehow also mentor them by our membership, helping and maybe also getting their scorecards up, and somehow getting corporates to help us do that. Because if we don't do that, the corporates themselves aren't going to be the employers of the future. Martin hit the nail on the head. It's going to be the SMEs. We've got to develop them. And they can't be survivalist businesses that we throw money at. It's got to be growth potential businesses. So whether we use BEE to partner the promising young upcoming emerging guys with successful white companies, together they must form the team that become this employer of the future and trade into Africa.
Well, from the conversation we've been having thus far, I mean, there's no lack of blueprints. We've got an abundance of them. Then the latest is the Growth and Development Strategy, GDS 2040, that's currently at play. A key indicator as to whether investors are convinced of these kind of blueprints and implementation of them would be the kind of investment we're currently seeing. I mean, what kind of investment flow are we seeing from foreign business, local business in the city of Johannesburg?
I think, you know, there's to what Keith said and what was said earlier, I think, you know, South Africa is a relatively slow growth economy in our own region. The opportunity of a region provides SADC. There's 285 million people across 15 countries, and undoubtedly Johannesburg must be the services hub for that and the platform for expansion for that. The investment interest is most certainly there. We need agility from a policy-making perspective. We have any African city would kill to have what we have in Johannesburg. We have a fantastic city. Of course, there's some things need to be worked on. Crime, for example, safety and security is paramount importance. We cannot be a true world-class leading city until we fully address that. And this will be, that relates to the youth unemployment challenge and just general sort of, management of softer issues perhaps beyond infrastructure. I think for me is moving forward is Johannesburg is needs to increasingly, and this is exactly the point, is we have a low trust political economy as a country. It's imperative that government and business work together, be at a country level, but in this case at a city level, to best improve that investment environment. We need to build that trust ultimately to underpin the vision we have as a city to ultimately to compete and succeed.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, let's leave it there. Thanks so much for having joined me today. We've come to the end of this week's edition of Invest Africa. Thanks again to Keith Brebner for joining us today, and Martin Davies. We'll be back at the same time next week. Until then, from all of us here, it's goodbye.